Hello beautiful people, my name is Venti and today I'm going to be recommending books to some of my favorite characters from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to assume that if you're watching this video, if you clicked on a video with this title, or if you're watching BookTube in general, that you don't have at least a little bit of familiarity and a little bit of love for the animated TV series Avatar: The Last Airbender. And in that event, I imagine that, like me, you're a little bit disappointed with the latest news regarding the live-action adaptation that Netflix was going to make. It's never a great sign when the original showrunners of a beloved franchise decide to ditch an adaptation because of creative differences, particularly when the creative differences are such that they might ruin the sanctity of this thing that we all know and love. So in attempts to regain some of the happiness that I feel when I watch this beloved show, I wanted to provide you guys with some Avatar: The Last Airbender content that was not aged up, made more bloody, made more sexy, and made more white. So that's what I'm going to be doing for you guys today. I'm going to be telling you what books I think each of the characters from Avatar: The Last Airbender would like to read. I say all. Considering this is a very expansive show with a great deal of world building and just a myriad of characters, when I say all the characters, I'm talking about primary and secondary characters at best, tertiary characters such as Sparky Boom Man / Combustion Man, or Mr. Cabbages. They're not going to be included in this list. I'm sorry if I leave off one of your favorites, but there's honestly so many characters. If I didn't leave off at least one, this would be like a 3-hour-long video, and that's just not something I'm prepared to do. Yeah, I think it's best if we just get started because regardless, there are quite a few characters and quite a lot of books to get through, and I want to show you all of them. And we're actually going to be starting with May, one of Azula's girl squad queens, who I just adore so much. I'm not gonna say that for all these characters. I adore all of these characters so much. For the future Fire Lady herself, or Fire Queen, I have decided to choose Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Six of Crows has so many touch points to May's life. It is full of the found family trope of misfits, and one of the primary characters is a knife-wielding badass who's fallen for a broody and dangerous guy. But more importantly than anything, Six of Crows is a story full of adventure and a deep, abiding love. One that exists among these dangerous and morally questionable teens that I think May would really be drawn to. She was basically a shut-in with her parents, a super privileged girl who wanted something more out of her life. I think that the way that people relate to money and Ketterdam, and the way that folks with privilege don't tend to be the best ones in this story is something that she would really relate to. Plus, she's dating Zuko, who on the surface might be all tough and stuff, but on the inside is a tiny little softie. And I feel like at the heart of Six of Crows, it's just a bunch of softies doing their best. So I think May would really relate to and enjoy this book. We're following that up with Ty Lee, and for her, I have to choose Harley in the Sky by Akemi Dawn Bowman. Again, the parallels between Ty Lee's life and the plot of this book are just absolutely unmistakable. This is about an acrobat who is at odds with the expectations placed upon her by her family and her journey towards self-discovery and self-acceptance. And if that's not Ty Lee to a T, I don't know what is. Also, from everything I know about Akemi Dawn Bowman's writing style, it's very whimsical and lush, and I think Ty Lee would have a lot of fun delving into a world where she could just get lost in the mysticism of the words. And I think Harley in the Sky would be the perfect book for her to do this in. And we're following it up with the queen of that trio, the would-be Fire Lady herself, Azula. And what book could I choose for Azula except for The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang? This book features a lot of things I think Azula would like, but more importantly, I think it features a lot of things that Azula would need. And I think that through fiction, she'd be better able to internalize those things because, let's be real, Homegirl isn't too great about direct criticism of her royal personage, you know? At the root of the Poppy War, there is incredible fire magic that I think would instantly draw her attention. And I think what would keep her suckered in is the main character, Rin's ambition and moral grayness. But I think that in sort of empathizing with Rin, and I really hope she'd be able to empathize with Rin despite Rin's low circumstances of birth, I think that Azula would be able to forgive her that, considering that she is truly the chosen of the God of Fire. If Azula was able to make that empathetic step and relate to Rin, I think it would be very important for her to see through Rin's eyes the horrors of war and what it looks like from the other side when you are one of the oppressed. I think potentially it could teach Azula some much needed empathy and show her how important it is to not alienate your friends. And from there, we're moving on to Team Good. Start off with another badass lady who isn't quite one of the main, core cast, but I love her so much that I had to choose a book for her, and the moment that I saw this book, I knew it had to be the one for her, and that's Suki. And for Suki, I'm going to say The Magnolia Sword, A Ballad of Mulan by Sherry Thomas. What can I say to convince you that this is the perfect book for Suki than to use her own words? I am a warrior, but I'm a girl too. And if that's not the story of Mulan, I don't know what is. I think Suki would relate so much, perhaps not to the idea of having to dress like a man to be a warrior, because to her, there is no dichotomy of you have to be one or you have to be the other. To her, it's very much you can be both and you should be both, and she is both. But I think that she would take great comfort and really fall in love with the story of a woman who exists in a world where it is a real dichotomy, choosing to become a warrior anyway. I think Suki would be super drawn to that, and I think she'd really love this story. Moving on to my favorite and yours, everybody's Taurus uncle, Uncle Iroh. For Uncle Iroh, I've chosen a book that's perhaps like a little more mature in theme, etc., than the books that I've mentioned previously, and it's also a book that is a little more quiet and contemplative, but is no less dramatic and intense for it. And for him, I've chosen Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I think Iroh would really be drawn to the complexity of this story and the multifacetedness of it, and the many layers that work together to make the narrative what it is. I think he would really, really enjoy the moral ambiguity of all the adult characters as they sort of play chess with one another and with their children, and have these weird little power trips between one another and with themselves. I think he would really enjoy that, because I think that were Avatar: The Last Airbender told from his point of view, that's sort of how he would see it, a bunch of children being manipulated to further the ambitions of various adults. And I don't think he was crazy into that, but I think it did intrigue him. Or it would if his, beloved nephew wasn't one of the pawns that was constantly being moved around by other people. I think Iroh would also be tremendously drawn to the family dynamics in the story. I think that Little Fires shows many, many different types of dysfunctional family, and it shows, at least in the children's point of view, the connections that we're all striving so hard to create with one another. And I think the sort of found family aspect of Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's like a big theme of the show as a whole, is something that Iroh would be drawn to in particular. And I think that that's something he would find in abundance in this book. Additionally, I think that the focus on culture and how it's rooted in identity would be very important to him. Iroh's a very grounded individual. You can see that in his Pai Sho and his tea, and the way that he relates to his brother, the Fire Lord, and his nephew, and even to himself. He's a very specific idea of how things should sort of be culturally, and I think that the discussion of what culture means, especially to a child, and what it would mean to be robbed of one's culture, is something that would be very interesting for him. But I also think he'd love the drama, like alongside the commentary, and I think he would really enjoy the slow burn plot where everything kind of slowly comes together. He's a fan of things that take a while to get right, and he doesn't begrudge the time it takes to get them right, as long as the end product is proper. And I think Little Fires is that to a T. So moving from the character in the show who has the most chill, to the character who probably has the least chill of not just anyone in the show, but anyone, full stop, period. And that is Fire Lord Zuko himself. Zuko is a person who's just looking for connection. So I think that in looking for a book or another piece of media, he would want to read something that he could relate to on a very deep and personal level. Also, I'm trash for the Witchland series and I haven't mentioned it in a video for a while. So what book could I have chosen for Zuko other than Blood Witch, the fourth book in the Witchland series by Susan Dennard? I think Zuko would appreciate the entirety of the series, but I think he would attach himself to Blood Witch the absolute hardest. And the reason for this is I think he would see a lot of himself in Aedwin the Blood Witch. A story about an outcast prince finding a way to hold his own and fall in love and ultimately become one of Team Good, even though he started out the story as a bad guy, and having that redemption arc where he becomes valuable and intrinsic to this team is something that I think Zuko would live and breathe and die for. I think he would like the rest of the series as well, just because of the really cool witcheries, which are really akin to bending. So I think he'd be fascinated by the study of that, because as you could tell literally from episode 1, Zuko is fascinated with styles of bending, and he's constantly striving to master more and more of it. I think he was really frustrated with Iroh because Iroh wanted to keep him at the basics, but Zuko wanted to see this expansive, all of the possibilities that you could do with this. And in the Witchland series, you get to see some really, really cool stuff happen with this magic, and I think he'd be really drawn to that. Even though he's meant to be Fire Lord, he isn't afraid of taking a step back and playing a supporting role to make good happen, as does Adwin. He would love it, okay? All of the rest of them you can fight me on. This is not one I'm gonna take criticism for. He would love this book. He would love this series, but he would love this book, and he would love Adwin so much to the point where he would like fully self-insert while reading. I'm right about that. You cannot tell me otherwise. Next we have the legend herself, Toph Beifong. I have to admit that the answer that I had for Toph hit me much faster than any of the rest of them did. She's actually the one who inspired this video series for me. So for Toph, I have to say The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, but specifically the audiobook. Toph is blind, so some of that physical, tangible reading, that's not really in the cards for her. I mean, I'm sure she could learn Braille, but would she? She's truly a more of a punchy lass than that, I think. But I do think that The Poet X would hold her attention very easily. The Poet X is a novel in verse, so it's almost more of a collection of poetry. And each poem can be sort of read as its own standalone thing. So Toph could listen to this piecemeal if she wanted to, but it's also a really, really short audiobook. I think just under 4 hours total. And so Toph would probably be able to get through that no problem, even in one sitting. And I do think that Toph, of all of the characters mentioned, has truly the shortest attention span ever. So I think a nice, short, quick, but not easy audiobook would be the perfect recommendation for her. And I think that as a person who uses hearing and obviously feeling, but hearing is probably one of her primary senses with which she interacts with the world, I think Toph would be super sensitive to voices. I think obviously she'd have to read via audiobook pretty much full time, but I think that audiobook narrators would be a thing that she's super picky with, and I think she would definitely love Elizabeth Acevedo's voice and cadence and writing style. Like I said, this book isn't an easy one. It definitely packs a punch, which I think Toph would really enjoy, but it's not the sort of physical violence that I think would be like an easy choice to say for her. I think Toph is at her core a really emotional kid, considering her relationship with her parents. So I think a story that deals with a lot of internal conflict like that is actually one that would hit her closer to home than like a thriller called something like Shot in the Back or Point Blank or Gunmetal. You know, fully she would read those things, but I think this is one that I would recommend to her because I think it would stick with her longer and have a more impactful moment in her life. I think Toph would really admire Xiomara as a main character in her rebellion against her parents, specifically her mom's restrictions that she puts on her. Toph doesn't like to be restrained, and I think she would really feel for Xiomara in that way, and I think she would root for her as she found her voice and found this rebellion and still managed to hold her own in the world without having them sort of supporting her or holding her back. At the end of The Poet X, there is a little bit of a reconciliation. I think that as, you know, like a 12-year-old girl, Toph would kind of want that to some extent with her parents. So I think it'd be an aspirational story for her as well. But more than anything, I think it's feminist as fuck. And Toph invented drinking respect women juice, you know? So I think she'd really just enjoy The Poet X a whole heck of a lot. Speaking of drinking respecting women juice, let's talk about Sokka. I know that he wasn't exactly what you would call a feminist king in the first couple of episodes, but he was 14 and he learned. Much like the series that I'm going to recommend for Sokka wasn't exactly too lady friendly in the first book, where all of the lady characters sort of seem to be props for the boy characters, specifically the protagonist. Sokka learned and developed, and the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown learned and developed. Beautiful segue. Well done, Bendy. Chef's kiss. Much like Sokka himself, the Red Rising series appears to be, like on the surface level, super like punch first, ask questions later, action heavy, guns a-blazing, super fast story, very fast paced. But underneath it, much like Sokka, Red Rising is a story that's really deeply rooted in strategy and playing the long game and taking small losses at the start if it means you're going to ensure yourself a win later. I think Sokka would be fascinated by a book that is on the inside how he is on the inside, appearing to all others as not much of a threat, not much of a deep story, but being deep down inside incredibly clever, incredibly strategic, and using all that strategy and cleverness in service of a deeply oppressed society, because that's why Sokka wants to go to war and do all of his cool shit, is because he wants to protect his village and his family and everyone else that's been ravaged by the Fire Nation. Also, these stories are just super fast paced, and despite being Mr. Strategy himself, I don't think Sokka would have it in him really to sit down with a book for a really long time. So the fact that he could absolutely fly through this series is, I think, another selling point in his favor for it. After Sokka, you know who I gotta talk about. My girl, the love of my life, Katara. For Katara, I have more of an author recommendation, but the specific book I'm going to be talking about in this case is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. A lot of N.K. Jemison's books feature an underdog in an oppressive society sort of rising up and finding and holding their own and overpowering the BS that's constantly trying to push them harder into the dirt. And I think The Fifth Season accomplishes that beautifully, which I think Katara would adore. Katara also, much like Zuko, I think, and perhaps in a more obvious way, has a deep, deep fascination with bending. It's one of the first things we see from her in the entire show is her marveling at her ability to use water bending. She truly loves this facet of her being. And I think that because of that, she would be fascinated by Origins in this book. They are immensely powerful benders. Well, I mean, that's the way she would think of them. They're immensely powerful earth benders. And I think she would just be fascinated by their story. And I think the injustices that are heaped upon the Origins, the fact that they're seen as second-class citizens and consistently oppressed because of this thing that she would see as so beautiful and intrinsic to their being, would rile Katara so much. So a story about people searching for an escape from bigotry at the eve of the end of the world, that would be right up her alley. I think she would absolutely adore this series. And then I think she would pick up the Inheritance trilogy and absolutely adore that. Probably also love The City We Became. I think, yeah, you know where I'm going with this. Katara would love N.K. Jemisin. I know I said that Zuko was the only one you couldn't fight me on. This is also one that, you'll have a hard time convincing me otherwise. And finally, the protagonist of the show, the one you've all been waiting for, Momo. No, that was a joke and a bad one at that. We're finally going to be talking about the book that I would recommend for Aang. And for this one, I had to say Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. So this book is both a classic and a children's story, and I think that sort of dichotomy would fit Aang to a T. I think that Aang and the Avatar as a whole truly stand for balance, and I think this book is full of complementary yet opposed forces. I think Aang would really love the duality of the old and the new. So a classic and something for a new reader, a child. He'd also love the balance between the whimsy of Howl and the groundedness of Sophie. And what's more Aang and what's more Avatar than a story about magic and self-discovery and above all else, love. I think Aang would adore this story. I think it would be super fun for him. It's short, so he'd get through it quickly. It's beautiful, so it would keep his attention from the start. And I think he would love it. And that's the last one. That is it for the books that I would be recommending to my favorite characters from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Again, my apologies if your favorite didn't make the cut of what I considered a primary or a secondary character. If you want me to do a follow-up featuring some of my favorite tertiary characters, like Jet and the Resistance Fighters, and Momo, actually, in a non-joking way. Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll start brainstorming to figure out what books that I would recommend to them. But until then, that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, please leave it a thumbs up. And if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post new videos every Thursday, and I would love for you to become part of my little booktube family. It's getting pretty late over here, and I want to both be able to edit this video so that it's ready for upload, and also watch at least another episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, maybe a little bit of Legend of Korra. We'll see. But regardless, that's it from me today. Thank you again so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video very, very soon. Goodbye.